Breaking records, crossing continents, and even escaping the scrapyard by a whisker, most locomotives never come close to a life like this. So what kind of machine refuses to retire, keeps rewriting history, and still draws crowds like a rock star nearly a century later? Let's step aboard the unbelievable story of the Flying Scotsman, the steam engine that simply wouldn't die. You know, whenever people talk about famous steam locomotives, the Flying Scotsman is the one that always steals the spotlight. And honestly, it deserves every bit of that fame. This machine wasn't just built, it was dreamed up by Sir Nigel Gresley, one of the greatest railway engineers Britain ever had. Back in 1923, when several railway companies merged to create the LNER, Gresley was tasked with pushing boundaries. And that's exactly what he did. But what if I told you the world's most famous steam locomotive didn't even start with a name at all, just a number and a price tag? You see, it was originally just number. 1472, built for 7,944 pounds, which was a massive amount of money at the time. But you can see where all that money went. The Flying Scotsman was part of the A1 class, a group of engines that were basically the muscle cars of their era. Big, powerful, and built to handle the toughest express routes. Now, the technical side of this engine is where things get really interesting. Imagine a giant machine stretching about 70 feet long and weighing around 97 tons, rolling down the tracks with absolute confidence. Its wheel arrangement was the famous 4-6-2 setup. Train fans call this the Pacific. 4 wheels up front for stability, 6 huge driving wheels in the middle for power, and 2 trailing wheels at the back to support the massive firebox. This layout was perfect for high-speed, long-distance travel. And under the hood, under the boiler, it had 3 cylinders, 2 on the outside, and 1 tucked in between the frames. With a boiler pressure of 220 pounds per square inch, the engine could push out a tractive effort of about 32,910 pounds. In simple terms, it pulled heavy express passenger trains like they were nothing, all while cruising at speeds people once thought steam engines could never sustain. Now here's where the Flying Scotsman really begins to step into legend. It had barely been running for a year when, in February 1924, it finally received the name we all know today. And that name wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It came from the famous express service between London King's Cross and Edinburgh Waverley, a route that had been around since 1862. Once it was renamed, its number changed too, becoming 4472. From that moment, the locomotive wasn't just another engine. It was the LNER's pride, their big showpiece. And oh boy, did it get attention. When it was displayed at the British Empire exhibition in Wembley in 1924, and again in 1925, millions of people saw it up close for the first time. Think of it like a celebrity appearance. People didn't just admire the engineering. They fell in love with the idea of what it stood for: speed, strength, and British ingenuity. That's really when the Flying Scotsman became a household name. But the real deal came in 1928. This is the part every train fan grins about. The LNER wanted to do something that sounded almost impossible at the time: run the entire London to Edinburgh journey, 392 miles, without stopping even once. Remember, steam engines eat through coal and water like crazy, so this wasn't a simple challenge. But how do you run a 392-mile journey without stopping even once, especially when a steam engine constantly needs coal and water? Well, to pull it off, engineers came up with a clever piece of equipment: the corridor tender. Just imagine a tender with a tiny passageway inside it, like a moving hallway squeezed between coal and water tanks. This allowed the crew to swap places while the train was still speeding along. No stopping, no slowing, just a seamless handover at full tilt. On the 1st of May, 1928, history was made. The Flying Scotsman completed the whole run in 8 hours and 3 minutes. Along the way, it scooped up water from troughs placed between the rails, drinking on the move like some steel racehorse. This wasn't just a railway stunt. It proved British engineering was operating on a whole different level. But if there's one moment that truly blasted the Flying Scotsman into worldwide fame, it's the day it cracked the 100-mile-per-hour mark. It was the 30th of November 1934, and the Locomotive was out on a test run near Stoke Bank during a London-Edinburgh journey. And then it happens. The needle hits 100 miles per hour and keeps going. For the first time in railway history, a steam locomotive had officially broken that barrier, and the one to do it? None other than the Flying Scotsman. In the 1930s, this achievement was a massive deal. Railways were no longer the rulers of travel. Cars were getting faster, airplanes were taking off, and people were wondering if steam trains had finally hit their limit. So when the Flying Scotsman cracked 100 miles per hour, it wasn't just a speed milestone. It was a bold message. It proved steam power still had fire left in it, and that British engineering could stand strong against the rise of modern machines. The media went crazy, the public celebrated, and almost instantly, the Scotsman became a legend. And the locomotive didn't stop there. Over the years, it kept evolving. When British Railways took over from the LNER, they continued upgrading the Scotsman and its A1 siblings. Between 1927 and 1947, the A1s, including the Scotsman, were rebuilt into the improved A3 class. This was a full performance overhaul. The boiler was redesigned, the heating surfaces expanded, and the superheater area nearly doubled from 525 to 1,104 square feet. All of this meant more efficient steam, more power, and a machine that ran hotter, faster, and better than ever. The Flying Scotsman's upgrades really showed in its performance. Its tractive effort jumped from around 29,800 pounds to nearly 32,910, meaning it could haul heavier trains with ease and keep its speed steady on long, demanding routes. By the time it retired in 1963, it had racked up an incredible 2.08 million miles, proof of just how reliable this machine was. But retirement actually pushed the Scotsman into global fame. When Alan Pegler bought it and took it to North America in 1969, the locomotive needed a full American-style makeover. A cowcatcher, bell, Buckeye couplers, an American whistle, air brakes, and a bright headlamp. Even then, strict anti-steam rules made the tour challenging. Then came its greatest adventure, the Australia tour of 1988 to 89. Covering over 28,000 miles, it achieved a 422-mile non-stop run, the longest ever by a steam engine, and even became the first standard gauge steam loco to reach Alice Springs, a true legend through and through. But what happens to a legendary locomotive once its working days are over? Does it retire peacefully, or does the real fight for survival begin? You know, for a locomotive as legendary as the Flying Scotsman, its future after retirement was surprisingly shaky. When it was withdrawn in 1963, there was a real fear it might end up scrapped like so many other steam engines of the era. But people simply couldn't let that happen. The Scotsman had become too iconic, too beloved, to just disappear. Thanks to passionate supporters and a few determined private owners, the locomotive survived long enough for the National Railway Museum to finally step in and buy it in 2004. At that point, it wasn't just a train anymore. It was a national treasure that absolutely needed saving. And then came one of the most intense restoration jobs ever attempted on a steam locomotive. From 2006 to 2016, the museum undertook a huge, decade-long rebuild that cost about £4.5 million. That price tag tells you everything. You're not just dealing with a piece of machinery, but a 90-year-old engineering masterpiece that had to be made safe for modern rails. They had to pretty much rebuild the heart of the locomotive. A brand new boiler, a new firebox and smoke box, and even a new chassis. But the goal wasn't to turn it into something new. It was to bring it back to life without losing what made it the Flying Scotsman. When it finally steamed again in 2016, it felt like watching history shake off the dust and roar back into the world. Today, it runs as a working museum piece, drawing massive crowds wherever it goes. And honestly, seeing it really move, reminds you why these old engines matter. They're living examples of how clever and ambitious Victorian and Edwardian engineers really were. And the Scotsman's legacy? It's unmatched. For nearly a century, it's been the world's most famous steam locomotive. First to hit 100 miles per hour, pioneer of non-stop long-distance service, a world traveler that's conquered everything from British mainlines to the Australian outback. It represents the golden age of steam in a way no other locomotive ever has. So what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear Flying Scotsman? Its 100 miles per hour record or its globe-spanning adventures?